Welcome to the Varietal Show. My name is Rory, and what we're doing this week is pretending to be a little cat who is going to make potions with their human companion. And I'll explain a bit more as to why I'm approaching the concept that way. But the game we're going to play is called Apothecaria, because what this show is, Varietal Show, is a write-along stream, and the purpose of the write-along stream is to write along together. So if you're here live, come and join us in the live chat. I see that Witchery and GS are there. Hello, Witchery. It's really lovely to see you again. I really enjoyed your contributions last week. And GS, good evening. Good evening to you. Said, cute kitty, cutie cat. The cat is not mine. I do have a cat. If we're lucky, he might make an appearance, but he only comes when it's greatly inconvenient and never any other time, so I don't think he will. Instead, though, I am going to use this cat. But I'll talk about that in a minute. If you have never been here before, or if you came here on the fairy tale streams, this isn't the fairy tale streams. This is about narrative and writing and so on. I think there's a lot of crossover between those things. I mean, I like them both. But if you're just here for fairy tale stories, that's not this. This is a ride-along stream. We will be back on Tuesday with more of those. But for tonight, what we do is we just basically write together, whether you want to give prompts in the chat or you just want to join into the conversation about the silly things that I write, and we just try to get a premise going. So why don't I stop rambling and explain the game for tonight, because it is a more involved game than normal. So, this part of the show is called litgames. Litgames stands for literature games, but it also kind of includes anything that gives a prompt structure for writing. And those can be solo journaling games, story gen games, lyrical games. Solo tabletop RPGs are often in this category. I am a writer. I really enjoy writing, and if you do as well, then you'll probably enjoy this. And otherwise, I'm not sure what there is to get out of the show, so there's a reason why it's a niche show. And the game that we're playing tonight is called Apothecaria. Apothecaria is a reasonably popular, pardon me, is a reasonably popular solo tabletop RPG. It's not one I've played much, but it has quite a community around it. The community includes Discord, where if you really want to play this game, there's people on a Discord that share their journal entries together, which is so cool. I've sort of done a version of that with some other games in some servers on Discord that I'm together. But as a result, one of the things I will say is that the game has a lot more mechanics. So I would say there's like two sort of sides of a spectrum in solo tabletop RPGs. One side of that spectrum is it's basically just prompts. You basically pull a card and you get a prompt and then you write. And there isn't, I would argue, much of a game there. I mean, I guess the game is sort of creative, trying to write around the prompt. And then on the other side, there's ones that are basically not about writing, and they're just sort of dice games or something you can play for yourself. You can think of Solitaire as belonging to those. And solo tabletop RPGs kind of come somewhere in between those two. And this one is closer to the mechanical side than we normally are. Not closer to the mechanical side than it is the story side. I wouldn't agree with that. But it's more than normal. Part of the reason I chose to do that is A, I like the game, and B, it's the middle of July and nobody's watching streams anyway, so it's a chance for me to sort of do something I enjoy that I know is not usually popular. So let's talk about the game. If you are not a regular viewer, you would not know this, but just to keep in mind that if you are watching this not live, you can go down to the description and click on one of the timestamps to skip this if you don't care about the description of the game. But it will take me a couple of minutes to explain because it is a little more involved. Here we go. The game requires you to have a pack of regular playing cards, and that's about it, which I imagine most people have. You will leave the jokers in if you're going to play it as written. Witchery says, hey, there's at least two of us. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. I don't want to give the impression that I'm feeling sorry for myself. I have fun, and anytime somebody shows up and talks and writes with me, I have fun with them. And that is the point. Little moments of community. Anyways, you will take those. The overall game structure is this. There's different phases of play and details about like scores you keep, and all these details will come at you in a second. But the gist of it is, to start a round of play, you draw a card. That card, as is often the case in these solo tabletop RPGs, is going to take you to a list where, let's say, you draw an ace. The ace has a certain prompt or description or challenge or whatever. And that is the just basics of it. You draw a card and you get a prompt, and then you sort of resolve it in various ways. The actual stages of play, I'm not going to go through the whole book because the book itself is 60 pages. I sort of have clippings of it here. I know it's smaller than can be read on stream, but you'll have to trust me on this. The basic 3 stages of play are diagnosis, foraging, and potion prep. They are done in that order. Diagnosis requires us to imagine a person coming in, so you guys can start imagining what our first customer will be. It is a sort of the reference points on style are sort of Studio Ghibli. This is from the creators of it. Studio Ghibli, somewhat fantasy, maybe a little bit cozy in that sense. So if you're thinking of characters in that genre, I mean, they can be anthropomorphic animals and so on. But anyways, somebody comes into your shop where you make potions. You will diagnose their condition, which requires you again to pull a card. Based on the card you pull, you get a disease or a condition or a curse or whatever. And I'll show you an example of one. There we go. The wounded, or how about this? The one that they use in the description of play is phototropy. And it comes with a word, in this case, curse and hair. Those are like tags. And a star, which is the value of each item. And it comes with a timer. And it comes with a description of what it does, which is during the full moon, the afflicted turns into a monstrous hamster and scurries around their home and village, nibbling on carts and walls. And then it has a consequence. Not all of them have consequences, but this one does. They go on another rampage. You lose 1 reputation and have to describe the aftermath because you failed to cure them in time, basically. So the first stage is to diagnose, which means you draw a card. In this case, if we drew a 2, the suit doesn't matter. If we drew a 2, it would give us phototropy, and then we would know we would need an ingredient that deals with curse and an ingredient that deals with hair. Okay. So that's it. Diagnosis is draw a card. It gives you something random that has some conditions. Now, foraging is sort of a 2-stage process. The way foraging works, I got to flip through a lot more pages here, is you need to get reagents. I think this section could be a little better organized. And I also nobody really cares. It's a popular game. Nobody cares about my opinion. But in general, I think your body text shouldn't be fancy. I do find this text at times a little hard to read. Those are like my only complaints about the game, by the way, which are pretty minor. But anyways, you get these lists of ingredients, and they're tied to certain locations, which it doesn't matter too much. It just means you have to go there to get them. But it tells you all this stuff about it. I'm not going to go too much into like forest and lock and all of that just now, but at the bottom of each ingredient, it references tags. So there's this, for example, Scramble Bramble can be used for mood, and it can be used for senses. And so that refers to the conditions where it gives you tags, right? Ear, blood, mood, magic, for Banshee's Blessing. So in other words, the conceit of the game is you go through a list of ingredients, you come up with a potion that will cure this condition based on matching the tags of the ingredients to the tags of the illness, and then you go looking for them. And that's where this forest and lock thing comes in, because the way it works is you need to go to one of the places that this grows. In this case, Scramble Bramble grows in a forest or in a lock, but it's more likely to be found in a forest because it has a lower number. When you draw a card, if you draw a card that has the value of the item, in this case a forest Scramble Bramble would be 3, the value of the item or greater, then you find the item. If you have the value less than the value of the item, you gain a thing called a foraging point, which I won't go into too much here, but you don't find the item right away. So basically, the gist of it is it's trying to recreate a circumstance where we diagnose something, we go, I know what you need, but I got to go forage. And then when you go out foraging, that's where the storytelling prompts come from, because a part of drawing that card with the value that determines whether we find it, it also gives us prompts of like we fall in mud or something like that, or some creature comes up and attacks us and so on. And then so basically we write little short stories about the people that came in sick, what we did to help them, and how that came out in the end. And there's all these sort of point systems in the background that really suit longer play. There's reputation points that you're trying to increase, which allows you to do more complicated recipes later on. You're trying to get silver so you can buy stuff that allows you to go to new places. Like, for example, you can buy a broom, which allows you to fly up to clouds, and that allows you to get higher end items and stuff. It's a full-fledged game. And I think that part of the game is really interesting. I just don't think we're going to engage with that that deeply. I think we're basically going to play around. Maybe two. And what I'm most interested in terms of the mechanic of this game for this stream, is just telling a little tale about our first customer in our apothecary and how it went as we tried to make a potion for them. So as usual, I explain it because if I was a person who came here to a solo tabletop RPG game, I would want the rules explained, but I do understand that a lot of people aren't that interested in them. They tell me that in the chat regularly. So I will be managing most of the mechanics, and I'll just sort of feed you guys the results. But if you guys have any questions about how the game plays, feel free to come in the live chat and ask. Because there's lots of stuff I'm sort of leaving aside right now. Just gonna have a drink of water. Oh, I realized I didn't say anything about potion prep. Potion prep is pretty straightforward. The only catch on that is when you finally prep the potion, you need to have the tools to do stuff with the ingredients. There are some basic tools you start with. And if you don't, then you can't make them the way that they mean to. But also you get to name your potion, which I think will be fun for us. So there we go. Our first client. Oh, I guess also let me give you the premise. Rather than making it a whole thing, I will just give you the premise of our story. Witchery says, I found my copy of it. I told you I have a lot of them, lol. That's awesome. Have you ever tried it before? I do think it's a if you like mechanics like that. By the way, if anyone has ever played the game, it's on Steam called Potion Craft. In many ways, this is identical to Potion Craft. Obviously, that's a video game. It's a little more involved in its mechanics, therefore, but this is pretty close. Also, there's a bunch of community expansion packs that I'm not going to go into, extra ingredients and conditions and stuff. Okay, so the premise of our story. We are an intelligent, witchy cat named... This is our cat. This is who we will be playing. What is their name? They're carrying a pumpkin, if you don't know. Witchery says, no, not yet. I get distracted after reading them more often than not. Ditto. It took me a while to get to this one. Like, I could tell I would like it, but between the sort of the text they'd chosen, which I found hard to read, and the length of it was a bit intimidating as well. But I did finally sit down and work my way through it. We are an intelligent witchy cat named what? I'll explain to you why Ev is playing a cat and not a person in a moment. Who has a human familiar named... Witchery says, I don't love deck-based games. Honestly, I find the cards slip around way more than dice. I agree. If they made a D, what is it, 14? Dice, you could do this with dice. Because it doesn't actually use the suits on the cards. It just uses the numbers, the values. The only catch you're going to have is that the jokers are tied to a overarching narrative that I'm not really talking about, but the premise of the book is that the book was given to you by your, like, aunt or something. She was a witch who ran this apothecary, and you don't know why she left, but she left you and this book in the shop with the instructions to basically, it's written from her perspective, her telling you how to do the job. And every time you draw a joker from this pile, it gives you a prompt to figuring out the mystery of what happened to her. Witchery says Morgana and GS says Celeste. Here's the thing, I can use both of them. The cat can be named Morgana, and the human familiar can be named Celeste. We are an intelligent witchy cat named Morgana who has a human familiar named Celeste. This Morgana has dabbled a bit in potion making, but always struggled without the thumbs. Witchery says, yeah, my cat is named Morgana. Oh, what kind of cat do you have? I have a black cat. I think he might be half Siamese, but he doesn't look it. He just acts it. If anyone's ever had a Siamese cat, they'll know what I mean. We are also, one of his parents was Siamese. We think. I won't go into it. There was a lot of cats. We sort of saved him from a house full of too many cats. Morgana has dabbled a bit in potion making, but always struggled without the thumbs. She finally befriended a lost artist girl. A lost girl named Celeste, who was an aimless artist in need of regular work. You have 4 actually: Morgana, Leo, Cleopatra, and Strider. Strider better be normal, or not normal, noble, I mean. He's got quite the name to live up to. I mean, I'm presuming that's named after Lord of the Rings. Maybe that's not the case. So, just a note on this before I go into the writing proper in our first client and all that. The game itself presumes you play the human and gives you a familiar, of which can be any sort. But I kind of just like the idea that it's just a very smart cat that uses a human to do a lot of the handwork. I don't really have a greater justification than that, other than it's just more whimsical. In my world, the cat talks and can talk to anybody and is basically recognized to be the person who runs, or the creature anyways, that runs the potion shop. Oh, Strider had a brother named Gandalf. Oh, that is so sweet. Okay. So who was our first client? I think somebody had said something and I've lost track of it now. Give me a brief description and name of our first client. I'm going to draw a card for their ailment. And then we can get to the game. Strider is a black kitty. Ooh. Was Nazgul on the table? Okay. So, just if anybody is still curious about that, while people tell me what the client is, there are several types of ailments, but we're novices, which is determined by our reputation level, which pretty much is 0. Novice ailments pull from this one table called Novice Ailments. So I'm drawing a card. It's a Joker card, but I'm not going into that right now. It's too early. We can come back to that. It's a 6. Okay. Again, the Joker cards are for the larger story about what happened to your aunt. That's more than I want to do right now. Okay, 6. Frogified, which means we need to get something that deals with wart and poison. And there's a timer of 6. After some clever clog wrote a story about kissing a frog, getting a prince, witches have had to deal with a flood of hopeless romantics, getting warty lips and poisoned. Okay. So now we have our ailment. How is this going to paste? That's not too bad. I don't need all of that. I just need the consequence, the timer, and... Witcher says, I had a Siamese called Caliborn. I named as many of the cat's fun names as I could get away with. I tend towards food names, but I do kind of like the idea of naming them after, things in the Silmarillion and so on. GS said, I suggested an old guy who's not actually old. Okay. Named Rune. But then there was also a recommendation for George, and chat seems to like George. Okay, so. I'm just going to have a little blurb. Journal entry number 1. Well, I arrived today and found the thick old book. My old aunt Buttons left me. She was such a fine... she had such a fine coat. Fine and glossy coat. I really looked forward to helping her clean it again. However, when we entered her old shop, we found her gone, with her book of recipes and ailments left out for me, with a note from me. Of course, I struggled to paw open the pages So I had to ask my lovely human familiar to lick her precious little thumbs. And peel open the book. She didn't explain where she went. She did say the shop was mine. I expected a bit more training, but I had no window for it. Before we could even discuss things, Celeste and I, the old brass bell over the door rang, and in walked a man of sickly green complexion, pocked by blackened old warts. Just says we used to have a black cat named Mephistopheles. I've always found that interesting because that's from the Cats musical, I believe, right? I mean, I've heard songs from it, and that's good enough for me. Not exactly a compelling story from what I've heard, but I believe it's the name of a devil or a demon historically. So I've always found that interesting. It's got a cutesy association. Witchery says, I honestly call them nonsense half the time. Yeah, that's the thing. You name your animal something, and by the end it's like foo foo fum fum or something, or who's a little pickle Pete. Okay. Pocked by blackened wards. Why did I spell it with an O? It's like a plant. And with a mouth much too wide for any regular human. The fellow was named George. And through the garbled words of his lolling. I've been on the internet so long I can't remember the official form of that word. Is that not lolling as in like LOL. Lolling like off to side with the tongue. I just can't remember if that's the right spelling for it. And through the garbled words of his lolling, long, sticky tongue, I was able to determine he had kissed a frog in hopes of finding himself a sweet prince. Celeste, the sensitive little creature she is, welled up with tears and promised she would paint him a wonderful painting of this dream man. Witchery is mentioning that the musical Cats has a song based on a T.S. Eliot poem, and that is one of probably only 3 things I know about that play, actually. The other is that it seems to be about them competing to die, which is super weird. Maybe I misunderstood that. Celeste, the sentient creature she is, welled up with tears and promised she would paint him a wonderful painting of this dream man. I had to interrupt. And ask Celeste to open Aunt, what did I say her name was? Morgana's. No, Morgana's my name. If you are new here, you might not know that I'm utterly terrible at name recall, to the extent that I think I actually might have a problem. Buttons. Witchery, what a great description. They say Cats is bleak but with pizzazz, and it definitely lines up with every description I've ever heard of it. Okay. I already forgot it. It was buttons, that's right. To open Aunt Button's book, so we could try to diagnose. For he had no one else to go to. Below are the details of our findings. This is how I'm kind of making it more gamey and speaking up. Just sort of summarize it. Client, George. Ailment, frogified. Consequence, the rush to the doctor. Timer 6. Ingredients. Okay. This is... I'm not sure what the better way to have organized this was, but there's probably a better way. In fact, it has such a community, there might even be a database that's like searchable to this end, but I think they are trying to recreate the feeling of flipping through an old book to find stuff, because basically what you get is big lists of ingredients. Done by different areas. And the only thing we're really looking for is the little tags at the bottom here for what they deal with. So, for example, we need a wort of at least 1 star's value. And you'll see that these little plants have little stars next to them. That means that anything above 1 star is going to be good enough for our uses. The next thing we have to match up with is wort. So as our little kitty paws their way through this book, we're looking for something to do with wort. And I see that Princess Toad here from Glimmerwood Grove has is an adorable little creature. The Princess Toad is a pinkish color with red lips. If I had more space, I would talk at length about their funny little courtship dance. But we can't, don't worry, we're not killing it. It's not that kind of game. We can scrape some of its mucus, boil that for wort. Okay, so the first ingredient then we'd be looking for is Princess Toad. Witchery says the downside to indie games is most of them would be better in a booklet, and there's no way to do that if you don't have good home printer. I would say the other downside to indie games is they don't have access to like professional layouts or designers, and sometimes that really shows. Like sometimes there's a good game, but like it's hard to figure out what it means sometimes. Okay, so the first ingredient we need is Princess Toad, and that will deal with wort for us, but the next thing we need to deal with is poison. So, okay. The one downside to poison is many things will poison but not deal with poison. There we go. So, for example, in Heroes Hollow, we can get crow coal. Which is a favorite among corvids who've eaten something foul. Crow coal is a silvery coal that neutralizes most ingested poisons. Getting it from crows that guard it isn't easy. Can be crushed for dehydration, stomach, and poison. Okay, so there we go. There's our other one. Richary says there's just not a lot of money in tabletop RPGs. What are you talking about? I'm obviously a millionaire from just playing them. Richary says, yeah, that's true. Even some big published books are laid out pretty bad. Yeah. I'm gonna say it. Wizards of the Coast make some pretty bad books, honestly. The way they lay them out, the content they put in them. For those who don't know, Wizards of the Coast is the company that makes D&D. I don't think I really realized how bad it was until I played Pathfinder, which is laid out much better. And I was like, oh man, what are they doing? They're even bound better. Okay. So... I don't think this really comes up too much here, but the Dungeon and Bog modifiers, they have an effect, but it basically tells you how hard it was to find. Wizards of the Coast books have been falling apart, haven't they? Yeah, because they're glue-bound reference books, which is insane, because a reference book is something you have to open repeatedly. So glue just cracks. Glue isn't meant for that much use. You're supposed to have them sort of stitch/glue bound. Anyways. Okay. So now we have to draw a card. Let's go to Glimmerwood Cave? Glimmerwood Grove? Yeah. Okay, a famous mystical forest. Glimmerwood is home to all manner of fey creatures, including fairies, giants, unicorns, and worst of all, will-o-wisps. Moss blankets the forest floor, while towering oaks and willows stretch high above. Keep an eye out for the ley lines, standing stones, and fairy circles. They cost like $70 here, so I never bought one. I didn't realize they were binding them worse than I hand bind things. 100% they were. I have some near me that are falling apart, honestly. And they cost, yeah, probably $60 to $70 here as well. Okay, so we're going to Glimmerwood Grove for our first ingredient, because that's where it was. Which means I need to draw a card. That is a 5. Okay, let's see. This is where we get a prompt about how the first ingredient goes. For anybody who cares how the game is played, every time you move areas or do certain things, you add to your timer, which is relevant to your sickness. Your sickness will give you a timer. If you run out of your timer, the consequence happens, which usually hurts your reputation. If there's no consequence, nothing happens. Okay, so number 5. You cross paths with a druid tending the forest who tells you the location of a reagent. Draw a card and treat it as a plant of the same value. Every time you get this result, write about your relationship with this kind forest caretaker. What wonders do they share with you? Hey guys, what is this druid like? I have to draw another card. That's another joker. Oh, nice. I drew a king, which is well above the value we needed, which means we will collect our first ingredient here, if it's a plant anyways. No, it's not. It's an animal. Okay, well, that's useless to me. But I think I still get it anyways because it was a 5? Anyways, you cross paths with a druid tending the forest who tells you the location of a reagent. Let's talk about that druid. The forest was so much more beautiful than I remember. When I than I had remembered, I guess. The moss was a bit damp for my paws, and so I stepped quick and high, which Celeste found funny for some reason. Hey guys, give me your best like sentence of forest description and I'll try to integrate it. Forest descriptions are fun. Witchery says, what of an older woman called Vera? Absolutely. Or Vera. I guess it depends on how you want to pronounce that. Moss was a bit damp for my paws. Gia says, Irish druidess. Vera, the Irish druidess. I found her giggles. Can't put it in brackets if I'm going to reference it. I found her giggling tolerable at first, but then I had to tell her to stop laughing at my high stepping. The moss was cold and damp on my toe beans. She promised she would, but then just snorted laughter here and there. I realized I could not expect so much self-restraint from a simple human, particularly not one as fussy as an artist. So I climbed an old oak and hopped through the branches. Oh, very nice, GS. The forest had an amber glow where the sun struggled to illuminate the ancient trees. You can absolutely work with that. So I climbed a wide old oak and hopped through the branches of the canopy. Celeste, snickering, became whinging. About how I was surely going to get stuck in the trees again. But I figured this was foolish. Fussing. That surely wouldn't recur. Up in the canopy where the squirrels and birds fled my fierce strut. The leaves had an amber glow where the sun struggled to illuminate through the ancient trees. It was later, for reasons unrelated to anything, that I tried to climb down and it wouldn't work. Celeste began bawling and lashing out in anger. I must remember to keep her fed. But her caterwauling brought the attention of a dear old woman named Vera. She was lanky. You guys have any traits you want me to put on Vera? Eye color, skin complexion, maybe how does her hair look? What does she wear as a druid? She was lanky and wore her skin loosely, but with grace. With the grace only a well-lived life of adventure can grant. Celeste babbled that I was in distress, which I was not. I just couldn't immediately climb down in the way that I needed. Ooh, Witchery says silvery hair. Maybe it's long braids with flowers woven in it and with twigs in her hair. What kind of flowers do you think? Gia says she wore an old tattered ceremonial robe with dignity. What color is her robe? Okay. Yeah, I have a way that we can sort of tie her hair to the action. She looked up. Vera calmed the girl. introduced herself to both of us. Witchery says, depends on the season. So this game starts you in early spring. All games start in early spring. So bizarrely, I have a mechanically defined answer for that. The seasons matter for the rarity of the ingredients, which is the thing I'm not engaging with too much. Viracom, the girl, introduced herself to both of us, then held out her arms in such a way that her old, tattered, ceremonial robe made a kind of hammock. She wanted me to leap into this flimsy, threadbare cloth strung between two weak arms, which was obviously madness. I would never engage. She and smacked her lips, but I could see the fools the humans were being. Such a plummet into such a risky to such a flimsy device would be certain death. I would never do it. The woman then reached up to her head of well-worn braids, woven with willow strands, peonies. I love the word peonies. I'm using that one. Thank you, Witchery. Peonies. Woven with willow strands, peonies, and various sweet smelling herbs. In fact, it was such an herb she plucked. She rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger, waved it on the wind to my nose, then dropped it into the hammock. It was clearly the sweet, devilish delight that is catnip. And as I watched her do this, I realized her arms were actually looking pretty strong. And cloth needn't all its threads to hold a sweet, fair-sized cat, such as I. So I reasoned on this new information to leap into the druid woman's hammock of sleeves. After some dignified nuzzling of the crushed leaf, I thanked the woman, and she granted my familiar a good handful of the fine herb. I don't quite understand why I was not given it. But we asked for guidance to find, what was it? Princess Frog something? Princess Toad. We had a fine conversation, us three, as she took us to a small pond, and I was able to scrape some mucus from the silly thing's back before it hopped away. We bid good afternoon and carried on to, where are we going next? Crow Coal. Is in Heroes Hollow. Oh, can I go to Heroes Hollow? I might not be able to. I think I need a sword, don't I? It's a dungeon. No, it doesn't say anything that I need anything special. Sometimes you need special things, like the Cloud Isles, you need to buy the broom. Okay. Crow Coal. And carried on to Heroes Hollow, though the druid woman did question the wisdom of entering that old dungeon. Okay, so if I haven't lost you folks at this point, we have one more entry to do. Journal entry 2, because then we can make our recipe and we can say we did a full round, basically, which means I need to pull a card. Whoop. I pulled several cards, but the one I had in my hand is a 9. Come on. I really messed up my pack of cards here. just as Witchery was saying. Slidey, measurable little things. Okay. Morgana. Hold a 9. Which will mean we go to 9 for this area. Heroes Hollow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 is a good number because it means we will find our ingredient. Because it's higher than the star count. I think is how it works. There's a bunch of details on it. Like if you're trying to find it outside of its native place and whatever else. By going to a new place, we knock our timer down by 1. I think by doing that event, we knock our timer down by 1, so I believe our timer's at 4. A 9, I believe, is a successful find. You only get foraging points for unsuccessful finds, which hasn't come up. Okay, so while wandering in the deeper sections of the dungeon, you come across a scared-looking newbie adventurer. They offer 10 silver for you to lead them out of the dungeon, but you have to decrease your timer by 1 if you do. Well, we can do that, right, folks? Which means... what does this person look like? Why did they get lost? Witchery says, though nothing quite beats the games that use a Jenga tower. I did one of those. It stressed chat out quite a bit. I do enjoy them. Those are the Wretched and Alone model, right? I think is the name of it. Well, there's more than one system that uses it, but that's like the main one you find on Itch. While wandering in the deeper sections of the dungeon, ooh. Creepy old dungeon, cracks along the worn, rough granite halls stand a bit shorter than we do today. The old gates, just stains of rust across the stone, long since collapsed. But dark and winding. Gia says he played one and one chatter was stressed. I'm not sure. Oh, you're talking about... oh, I thought you were talking about the story. Okay, so this newbie adventurer, I don't know if anybody here has played D&D. We could make it your character from D&D if you want to tell me about it. But it's a chance for 10 silver. We probably should have listened to the druid woman. For the stones on the floors, the worn stone of the deep, winding dungeon. What says cold and slimy as any moss in the forest. Also, the place echoed and groaned with the strange sounds of creatures. Odd breezes would kick up. You had an elven ranger named Lumiel who never got past level 3. Okay, Lumiel. Game died, usual stuff. Yes. No need to explain further. If you want to know how most D&D games end, those who don't play, people just stop showing up, or two people get in a fight and it becomes awkward, or... I mean, it's human beings in a room doing things that can be stressful. You get what you get. Odd breezes would kick up strange scents I could not quite place. Celeste would shriek and swat at her face every time a simple spiderweb hot on it. I tried several times to explain Lumiel. Okay. Which he says. I tried several times to explain that Celeste was a grown woman who could easily eat a spider, so she shouldn't be afraid. Somehow, this made her shriek louder. Oh well. She had brown hair, green eyes, a little standoffish because she much preferred nature to people. Honestly, Lumiel, same. Oh well, it was for the best. Her ghoulish screaming drew out a wide-eyed elf woman. Who Celeste insisted was a ghost. I stepped forward and spoke up more appropriate greeting, for I could smell she was no ghost. The woman was Lumiel. She was tall, but held herself small, as if she worried about standing out too much. She had soft brown hair that draped over her shoulders in a playful way. Though I never found an opportunity to test its playful capacities. Witchery says Celeste is a mood, yes. I do wonder, what cats think of us when we're scared of things that we are much bigger than. I mean, they don't think about us. What am I talking about? I already know. Her eyes were as green as a fresh It's probably not the best analogy I've ever done. Her eyes were as green as a vibrant pond. I'm open to other ones. She explained when Celeste was calmed and could be reasoned with. I carry cupcakes in my travel pack for moments like this. Witchery says, I think it was a Kenya-based name, or Quenya. I've actually only ever seen that written. That is the name of one of, for those who don't know, one of Tolkien's Elvish dialects, because he had more than one. Something like Daughter of the Forest, maybe. I had a character who was, I don't think it was Kenya, but it was Elrohir, which was Son of Man or something like that, but it was a name. I don't know why this doesn't want to turn into an M dash. That she had entered the dungeon searching for some strange old artifacts. But the party that accompanied her had grown to bicker over which direction to take. So long and petty was this disagreeing at every branching pathway. I may be projecting a bit here on your character. This is my experience of some of the worst D&D games. Witchery says it's High Elvish spoken by the elves from Valinor, which is the island that you're not allowed to go to, you miserable humans. So long and petty was this disagreeing at every branching pathway that little by little the wrong words were exchanged between the wrong people. And this and Lumiel, that's right, turned about to find that none were with her. She was lost and alone for several days in the dungeon. My being a cat of higher sensory and intellectual capacities, walked her out of the dungeon. When I explained why we had come there to find crow coal for a poisoning. That was the name of it, right? Crow coal? Quenya. Giving the description of how to pronounce Quenya. Crow coal, that was the name of it. Yeah, Witchery said, that being said, an island was sunk because they're not supposed to go. Yeah, that's what I'm referencing. It's not just that they're not allowed to go, it will kill humans faster than they should die. Undying Lands is a bit of a misnomer. It's really Lands of the Undying in practice. Yeah, which is For anybody who's watched the Amazon series, it seems to be the story they are angling to tell, at least in part. Which I'll agree, that series has not been like up to the quality of the movies, but even the later movies weren't up to the quality of the original movies or the books, which stand above all of them. So I went in with, middling expectations, and I felt like they were met. The only thing that bothered me was the conflating of like 300 years to 3 days with the construction of the rings. I get why they did it, but also the nerd in me was a little annoyed by that. When I explained why he'd come there to find crow coal for a poisoning, it turned out the lovely elven woman had collected some in her own dungeoneering. Witchery says they don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, it's messing with it. I know, and I can't believe how many articles who like carve it up and make big deals about the lore and stuff don't understand that they don't have access to like 80% of the lore. It's fine. It's pretty, they're trying, I'm happy. Yeah, I think it got hit way too hard. There's some really great characters too. Every dwarf in that series was brilliant. Yeah, Witcher. I won't go into it because we're an hour and 20 minutes and technically I should be writing, but just know that my heart beats the same as yours on that point about the rings. It's the only part of the series that I was hung up on, but other than that, it was pretty good. It was fine. I think people are being way too hard on it. But internet loves a grievance. They don't like things. It turned out the lovely elven woman had collected some in her own dungeoneering. When we departed at the exit, she thanked us profusely and insisted on giving us 10 silver. On top of the coal. I invited her to my apothecary, to my aunt's apothecary, whenever she pleased. Witchery says the internet is what if cinema sins, but we're serious about it. For those who don't know, Cinema Sins, it's an entertainment piece. They go through movies and they supposedly find loopholes and stuff. But it's kind of famous for not really finding loopholes and kind of just complaining about things that they didn't understand about the plot. And I get it, because it's mostly just a comedy setup. It stopped being about anything serious years ago. But it has this unfortunate effect of a bunch of people who simply do not understand that it's mostly just going for jokes. It's riffing on a movie. It's not trying to say anything serious about film criticism or anything, and take it super seriously. So that summary from Witchery is excellent. That is exactly the way the internet encounters it. I mean, the internet is the place that thinks artificial intelligence can make art when it has nothing to express, which shows how much they understand about art. Okay, so I invited her to my apothecary whenever she pleased or needed. With that sorted, though it was a bit slower than I had anticipated, we had our 2 ingredients for the potion. A lot of people ate the onion. We had our 2 ingredients for the potion. Okay. So we started with 6 time for this ailment. We went to the first place. The first place you go to doesn't take any time. That's just rules as written. But when we traveled from the forest to the dungeon, that cost us 1 time. And talking with Vera cost us 1 time. So we were down to 4. When we went into the dungeon, that's already going to cost us 1 time. So we're down to 3. And then helping the lady puts us at 2. So now I think we have to travel home, which I think leaves us 1 time, which I think will be perfect. If I'm understanding the rules correctly, which I very well may not be. There are a lot of rules. I don't say that as a criticism, actually. I'm a person who likes mechanics, but I can see how some people might not. Which means that we have to make our potion. There isn't really much to it, making the potion, other than we need to boil, which refers to having certain tools, but we have the ability to boil. And the crow's coal, what do we have to do with it? Find crow. Can be crushed, so we just need a pestle and mortar, which we already have. So I'm just going to really briefly write the recipe of this potion, which I'll remind you folks is for undoing a person who has gotten sort of half turned into a frog from kissing frogs. We need a name for this potion, and I'm putting that on you, chat. What name do you want to give a potion that cures, what's it called? Frogified. It contains princess toad slime and crow coal crushed up. I will write out just the basics of the recipe. I realize that we have now essentially written the I looked for a recipe and they told me my life story about making the recipe version of a high fantasy version of that. Although we have actually done that before. We did a year and a half ago one that was supposedly, I think it was like Samwise or something's voice we had dropped it. Okay. Collect 1 piece of at least 2 copper weight crow's coal whole. I'm writing this like an old recipe. Then use pestle upon the coal in the mortar until fine as river sand, but not as fine as beach sand. If you've never watched any old recipes where they read them out loud, the way they describe things are insane. I'm really enjoying that part of it. Mix let the dust rest for at least 1 turn of the hourglass. Then boil the princess frog mucus until it bubbles with aggression, but not so long that it thickens in such a manner it would hang from a peacock feather. Maybe a crow's feather is better. Finally, mix vigorously. Well, the crushed crow coal. Yeah, GS says tell the crows or something oddly specific like that. Absolutely. The crushed crow coal into the mucus before it cools, but not before its bubbles rest. Stir strong enough to spill slightly from the lip of a high kettle. Rest ingredients in a lead glass tincture. No, not tincture. That's a type of thing. What's the word I'm looking for? I'll just say vial for now. This is the kind of thing that could hang me up for a while. Rest ingredients in a lead glass vial for until the cock crows upon the following morn. Turn it once and set it until the moonlight illuminates it. Apply directly to affected areas. GS says, haha, this recipe's cracking me up. And GS says it should be called bristle burn tincture. Love it. Okay. That's another long one. That's okay. I was having fun. There are so many mechanics to this game that I didn't really touch on, so I do recommend people play it. You know, I think there is some clever balancing in it. For example, if you keep, because I didn't really explain this too well, but as you draw a card, the value of that card reflects on the, I believe, the amount of stars next to the item you're trying to collect is what I remembered. And you can try to collect them other places as well, which is the other places they grow, but they just might have a higher value. Witchery says, maybe I'm bad for your schedule. I have no schedule. Witchery, you're not bad for my schedule. Also, you said last week, I remember, I meant to respond to it and I got off on something. You were feeling as if you were being intrusive with the research, and you're not. I actually greatly appreciate people just throwing ideas in the pot and things that they know. That is exactly the point. 17,000 topics to distract on. Yeah, you see, I don't think they're distracting. Personally, I don't feel distracted. I feel like this is the core. I mean, if I was going to assign an ethos to this channel between the folklore and these games, it's that narratives are largely a community exercise, and that in modern times, in because of developments with publishing being very personal, and you sit on a train and read alone and whatever, like, it just kind of changed how we consume stories. I think it's become obscured the fact that writers don't divine stories to them. writers would go around for most of history and collect stories and have their own versions, and people in the audience would contribute to them and stuff. And that's more the feel I'm going for here. What I believe is sort of the true development of narrative that maybe I refine in private if I really like something, but here we're just putting together silly little stories. And that's how all great writing begins. So not at all. Never feel like you're imposing. I just, if I'm busy, I won't. Witchery said, and copyright, it ate the common narrative. Yes, I wrote a 30-page paper for no one in particular. It was a research paper. I did consider making a video on it. I may still, but it's a ways off from being good enough for that. About how copyright is decaying narrative, and that what a lot of people assign to other causes is really just, it's all locked in copyright, so you can't make stories the way that we did for most of history. Completely agree with that. Anyways, if you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to know the story we came up with, and I like the one we came up with today. This game was fun. This was called Apothecaria. It has a beautiful cover, which I'm not looking at right now. There it is. Apothecaria is about being whatever you want to be, but you make potions. You go and forage for ingredients, and you make potions for conditions. All you needed to play it was a deck of cards. And the story we came up with, I decided that we were going to play a cat who considers their human their familiar, and the cat is the one who really makes the potions. So without any further fussing, let's see what we came up with. Well, I arrived today and found the thick old book my Aunt Buttons left me. She had such fine and glossy coat, I really looked forward to helping her clean it again. However, when we entered her old shop, we found her gone, with her book of recipes and ailments left out with a note for me, Morgana. Of course, I struggled to paw open the pages, so I had to ask my lovely human familiar to lick her precious little thumbs and peel open the book. She didn't explain... Sorry. My Aunt Buttons had not left a note explaining where she went. Too many she's on the table. But she did say the shop was now mine. Well, I had expected a bit more training, maybe just a summer job making potions. But I guess I had no window for it, because before we could even discuss this development, Celeste and I, the old brass bell over the door rang, and in walked a man of sickly green complexion. He was pocked by blackened old warts, and had a mouth much too wide for any regular human. This fellow called himself George, and through the garbled words of his lolling, long, sticky tongue, I was able to determine he had kissed a frog. In fact, several frogs, in hopes of finding himself a sweet prince. Celeste, the sensitive creature she is, welled up with tears and promised she would paint George a wonderful painting of this dream man. Silly Celeste, of course. That doesn't help him. I had to interrupt and ask Celeste to open Aunt Button's book so we could try to diagnose the man's condition, for he clearly had nowhere else to go. Below are the details of our findings. Client, George. Ailment, frogified. And the description of frogified, I didn't put it in here, but I will for people who are checking in. After some clever clog wrote a story about kissing a frog and getting a prince, witches have had to deal with a flood of hopeless romantics getting warty lips and being poisoned. We then determined, based on our recipe, based on the condition that we found and our Aunt Button's recipe book, that we needed the mucus from the back of a princess toad, which lived in a forest, I believe, or a bog, and crow coal, a magic ingredient that is generally found in a dungeon setting. So we went for the princess frog first. The forest was so much more beautiful than I had remembered. The moss, though, was a bit damp for my paws, so I stepped quick and high, which Celeste found funny for some reason. And I found her giggling tolerable at first, but then I had to tell her to stop laughing at my high stepping. It was the moss was cold and damp on my toe beans. She promised me she would stop laughing, but that just led to her snorting laughing here and there while trying to hold it in. Now I realized I could not expect so much self-restraint from a simple human, particularly not one as fussy as an artist, so I climbed a wide old oak and hopped through the branches of the canopy. Celeste's snickering became whinging about how I was surely going to get stuck in the trees again, but I figured this was foolish fussing about a situation that surely wouldn't reoccur. Up in the canopy, where the squirrels and birds fled my fierce strut, the leaves had an amber glow where the sun struggled to illuminate through the ancient trees. It was later, for reasons unrelated to anything, that I tried to climb down. It just wouldn't work, for no good reason. Celeste began bawling and lashing out in anger. I must remember to keep her fed. She was clearly just having a fit. Anyways, her caterwauling did have a use, for it brought the attention of a dear old woman named Vera. She was lanky and wore her skin loosely, but with the grace only a well-lived life of adventure can grant. Now Celeste babbled that her cat was in distress, which I was not. I just couldn't immediately climb down in the way that I needed or had planned. Vera calmed the girl, introduced herself to both of us, then held out her arms in such a way that her old tattered ceremonial robe made a kind of hammock. She wanted me to leap into this flimsy, threadbare cloth strung between two week-old arms, which was obviously madness I would never engage in. This old woman, Vera, she went psst, 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 psst to her and smacked her lips, but I could see the fools the humans were being. Such a plummet into such a flimsy device would be certain death. I would never do it. I would never do it. The woman then reached up into her head of well-worn braids woven with willow strands, peonies, and various sweet-smelling herbs. In fact, it was such an herb she plucked. She rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger, waved it on the wind to my nose, and then dropped it into the hammock. It was clearly the sweet devilish delight that is catnip. And as I watched her do this, I realized her arms were actually looking pretty strong, and the cloth needn't all its threads to hold a sweet, fair-sized cat such as I, and so I reasoned, on this new information, to leap into the Druid woman's hammock sleeves. After some dignified nuzzling of the crushed leaf, I thanked the woman, and she granted my familiar a good handful of the fine herb. I don't quite understand why I was not given it directly, but I didn't argue. Instead, we asked for guidance to finding a princess toad. She'd agreed to take us, and on the way we had a fine conversation, us three. And finally, we ended up at a small pond, where I was able to sneak up upon a singing princess toad and scrape some mucus from that silly thing's little back before it hopped away in surprise. We bid Vera good afternoon and carried on towards the Hero's Hollow, a dungeon said to contain crow coal, according to my aunt's book. Though the druid woman Vera did question the wisdom of us entering that old dungeon, just the two of us, I assured her it would be fine. Journal entry 2. We probably should have listened to the druid woman, for the worn stone of the deep winding dungeon was as cold and slimy as any moss in the forest. The place echoed and groaned with the strange sounds of creatures. Odd breezes would kick up strange scents I could not quite place in that maze. Celeste would shriek and swat at her face every time a simple spiderweb caught on it. I tried several times to explain to Celeste that she was a grown woman who could easily eat a spider, so she shouldn't be afraid. Somehow this made her shriek louder. Oh well, that turned out to be for the best again. Her ghoulish screaming drew out a wide-eyed elf woman who Celeste insisted was a ghost. I, the more sensible of the two, stepped forward and spoke a more appropriate greeting, for I could smell this elven woman was no ghost. In fact, the woman was Lumiel. She was tall, but held herself small, as if she worried about standing out too much. She had soft brown hair that draped over her shoulders in a playful way, though I never quite found opportunities to test its playful capacities. Her eyes were as green as a vibrant pond. The elven woman then explained, when Celeste was calmed and could be reasoned with, I carry cupcakes in my travel pack for moments like that the elven woman had entered the dungeon searching for some strange old artifacts, but the party that had accompanied her had grown to bicker over which direction to take. So long and petty was this disagreeing at every branching path that little by little the wrong words were exchanged between the wrong people, and Lumiel turned about to find that none were with her. She was lost and alone for several days before we found her in the dungeon. My being a cat of higher sensory abilities and intellectual capacities walked her out of the dungeon with much ease. I simply could smell and retrace my steps. And when I explained on our walk out why we'd come there, which was to find crow coal for a poisoning, it turned out that the lovely elven woman had collected some in her own dungeoneering. So when we departed at the exit, she thanked us profusely and insisted on giving us 10 silver on top of the coal. I invited her to my aunt's apothecary whenever she pleased or needed, and with that sorted, though it was a bit slower than I had anticipated, we had our 2 ingredients for the potion, which I detail now. Bristleburn Tincture. Collect 1 piece of at least 2 copper weights worth of crow's coal whole. Then use pestle upon the coal in the mortar until fine as river sand, but not as fine as beach sand. Let the dust rest for at least 1 turn of this hourglass. Then boil the princess frog mucus until it bubbles with aggression, but not so long that it thickens in such a manner that it would hang from a crow's feather. Finally, mix vigorously the crushed crow coal into the mucus before it cools, but not before its bubbles rest. Stir strong enough to spill slightly from the lip of a high kettle. Rest ingredients in a lead glass vial until the cock crows upon the following morn. Turn it once and set it until the moonlight illuminates it. Apply directly to affected areas upon person afflicted with frogified. And that's what we came up with. Witchery, adding to our copyright conversation, says, like there is some use in allowing copyright writers to be able to eat, but it's also not how writing worked ever until the last 200 years. But also, copyright didn't end up protecting writers at all. All that really happens is you get muscled into selling your rights for basically nothing. And then it just becomes a real estate game between investors trying to puff out portfolios with cultural materials. Like, it didn't even work. Like, I like the idea of copyright, but that's not how it actually ever got applied. Witchery says, do you think you'll do Koriko, or is it too long? Let me look it up. I don't think I know it. I'll check it now. Koriko. Tabletop RPG. A Magical Year by Jack Harrison. Oh, what beautiful art. I don't think I have $18 to spend. I don't think I have it. It says here that this is a game for 1 player designed for contemplative solo play. It's a bubbling cauldron of simple rules and writing prompts stirred together to produce the story of a teenage witch spending a year away from home in an unfamiliar city called Koriko. Well, that is lovely. Oh, it's Kiki's delivery service inspired one. Now that is what I was thinking. And I think actually GS has mentioned before that they really like Kiki's delivery service. I really like Kiki's delivery story. Oh, did it run out of community copies? Let me see. No, it didn't. It has 10,000 community copies. Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, in that case, I'll take a look at it. It sounds like it'll work fine. In terms of like, you know, how long do I go? I try to have like kind of a beginning, middle, and an end, or at least some kind of satisfying premise or a setup or something like it. But I don't always finish the stories, and that's okay. Most of the games we don't finish. Most of the games would take 5-6 hours to finish. Witchery said, yeah, he's generous. No kidding. I don't think I've ever seen that many community copies, especially on something that has such gorgeous art, which is, you know, expensive. I will take a look at it. I feel like the answer is probably yes. I could probably play this fine. I really like Ghibli stuff, so like, there's no reason for me not to. This is the art I was talking about, just in case anybody in the chat is wondering. GS says, fantastic tale, and that recipe is epic. Well, thank you. And Kiki's my favorite. Okay, I did remember that correctly. Well, okay. I mean, as long as a couple of people show up and throw ideas in the ring, you know, it's great. I have great fun. I think to add, like, I sort of stress a little bit about the length, and I'll put a little more context to that. The only thing that worries me about the length of any video is I know that when a person is looking to click on a video, when they see that it's 2 hours long, they're significantly less likely to click on it. But that's kind of an afterthought, to be honest. The reason why these streams are going longer is because I have people participating in chat, which is the ideal. For me personally, I would do 3-4 hour games if I had a chat to support it, really. Because they're fun. I like doing it. So I appreciate the company and everybody who is a sort of found friend, if that's not too presumptuous. Which means, of course, that thank you very much. Witchery says I click on 5 hour long videos sometimes. Yeah, I do too, but I recognize I'm not everyone. GS says night all and thanks. Night GS. Witchery, thank you very much for your contributions, and GS and everybody who went out there lurking. Thank you very much. If you like the stream, please remember to give it a like. And if you want to see more solo tabletop RPGs from me, we have a whole playlist of them. Pretty much since the beginning of the year, the Varietal Show has been doing solo tabletop RPGs. Thank you so much for your time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out of my apothecary.